Actually, modernity has completely misunderstood children. I think we need to revisit everything about children, because we are in a crisis, ecological crisis, and which you can now see it in every aspect of our life. We are in crisis, and I think in order to understand what is the crisis in human beings, we need to understand what is a child. The way that we explore what is a cell in order to understand life. So basic unit of human being is a child, and that is where we need to revisit and really try to understand what is really a child. And modernity unfortunately has not looked at children as capable beings. So the starting point is that they are fragile and they need to be taught. So all the research till date, what has happened is that children as being that needs to be taught, that needs help. So there is no question of respecting children. So when I lived with rural tribal people, indigenous communities, I found that their whole approach to children is completely different from the way that modern educated people respond to children. There I found that there is no teaching at all. They have absolute freedom, and I call that freedom existential freedom. That freedom is not something that is aware, it is there. You don't even have to think that you need freedom. Freedom is a given thing. It's not something that to ask for or somebody has to give. But that is what condition that life provides for all living being to be autonomous. So naturally there is no teaching in indigenous communities, and there is an ambience of freedom, a space where whatever is inherent is awakened. And rural communities are very rich in processes. Everybody is doing something or the other. They are not just reading books and wasting their time. Actually they are living. They are not reading about life, but they are living. So that is the environment in which children need, so that they awaken the processes that are inherent in them. Because they are only aligning with processes of life. That's what it is. And also when we talk about creation of knowledge, it's actually recreation of knowledge. There's nothing for children, it is new. But in the context of rest of life, it is not new. They're only recreating what is already available. But this recreation is very important, because that is what makes them original and authentic. And that's a primary condition that human being needs to have. And indigenous communities have that. And what is also happening is that the kind of research, the kind of understanding that we have done on children is also because why we are not able to understand children is because we have created a certain kind of a paradigm, slots, compartments to understand a child. The problem is basically this, that the literate people are fragmented and compartmentalized, whereas the indigenous communities are holistic. So what is happening is that the fragmented mind is trying to understand the holistic nature of life, and they have no way of connecting with the whole, because they continuously fragment everything, analyze everything, divide, and then try to understand it. This is the basic problem of the cognitive crisis of modern man. And so this is like a catch-22 situation. Unless he transform themselves and become holistic, there is no way of understanding the wholeness of life. And the child represents the wholeness of life. It's born as a holistic being, and if the conditions are fragmented, child becomes fragmented. If the conditions are holistic, the child awakens to its holistic possibilities. So this is a very important thing to understand. So two things we can explore in this. One is that what makes life holistic, and the other one is that what has made us fragmented. So these two things we can look at. The life is whole because that is the nature of life. And indigenous communities, the children from indigenous communities, because of the what you call that, the the nature of life there, the child is able to awaken to their possibilities. Awakening basically means this, that we are all born with potentialities, and depending upon the condition, we awaken to what is there. For example, suppose we take, we all have the potential to communicate, to learn language. Now, what language is learned depends on the context where you are born. But so everything, we come with the potentials of doing things. So whatever is in the context will awaken to our possibilities. For another example is that suppose you are going to, you're born in a desert, then the whole possibility is of understanding the desert and its ways of being there, So this is, every place will dictate that. If you are as an Eskimo child will come with the universal possibility with which every child is born with. Because if you can take an Eskimo child and bring him to the desert and see what happens, immediately their whole thing will change, and they will, their system will change. Meaning the inner capacity remains, but the outer context, depending upon that change, the systems will change. This is very important to understand, that we are born with the universal qualities of wherever we are born, we will adjust to that. So we are born with universal capabilities, but the context makes us into particular beings. And in indigenous communities, because there is no teaching, because there is no engineering, because there is no conditioning, the universal being and the particular being coexist. What happens in modern society is that because they don't value this universal being at all, and also because they get into teaching, they get into teaching children what they think is the child should learn, not what the child is actually supposed to learn biologically. The child completely loses the connection with the universal being. It disconnects from that, and it becomes a very narrow, individualistic, selfish being. That selflessness of this is another issue, that every being, see, other very important thing that we should keep in mind is that the movement of life, if you see why life is there, or what life is doing, is that life is sustaining life. That's what you see. Everywhere you look around, you find that somehow life is, you look at the concrete buildings which are unused. How does a tree grow there? How was trees and plants and growing on all kinds of places, in spite of the concrete and everything that we have laid it to block, So life has a tremendous, energy to live. And this is not just with other life, with us also. So this wanting to sustain life is the fundamental basis of value system. And this is the value that life has given. So within that, but you also see that so there's an interesting kind of combination there, that the collective being is there, the individual being is there. So naturally the value system that you develop is for sustaining of everybody, not just you. The problem with modernity is that because it is making you selfish, self-centered, when we talk about sustainability, immediately it's about my sustainability, my company's sustainability, my nation's sustainability, not sustainability of life. This is a very, very crucial thing to understand, because this is the very nature of within us. This exists. So from all this, what is very clear is that every child or everything in life is non-dualistic. Non-dualism is actually an integration of opposites. It merges into a seamless way, and both are happening simultaneously. For example, that how do you actually sustain you and the other? Because without the other, you can't live. So there is a coexistence of the prey and the predator. For some way, the predator must ensure that the prey should survive. You see? So in an interesting way, that's where the life is. And every child is born with this. What happens in modernity is that that we get fragmented and we deny the other, and naturally the selfishness and the whole thing changes. Not only that, in modernity, our structure of our system is that we are always hierarchical, we are linear. We create binaries and we create hierarchies. So if you look at any language, the kind of language that we use, it becomes very clear. For example, when we say, or the notion that we are educated, subconsciously we begin to feel that we are superior, because the fact that we feel educated, makes you feel that you are superior. So without your knowing, your behavior with people who are not educated would be that of hierarchy. So whether the way you treat children or the way you treat the non-literate people, that hierarchy exists. They are very subconscious. And so basically the fundamental problem of modernity is that how we have become anthropocentric. From nature-centric beings, we become anthropocentric beings. So I think it's interesting to look at the whole history of humankind and see that there are two very important biological issues, changes that has happened in our life. One was when we shifted from raw food to cooked food. The whole biochemistry changed, and I don't think it was a smooth transition. It has taken quite some years, maybe few centuries, for us to really adapt and acclimatize to a completely new way of food, because the whole biochemistry should change. So that was one very important biochemistry or biological change that took place. Then the next biological transformation that happened was, in fact, when we denied our biology by shifting from orality to literacy. See, if we look at the context of orality, it's actually a whole biological system that is at work, which means that senses have the primary role of giving inputs. The sensory inputs has the primary role, and that then the way the language then comes in is to give names to those sensory inputs. So first layer of our cognitive foundation in orality is sensory inputs. The second layer is the way we connect the world and the word. And the third layer would be that from this as the basis, we create its conceptual and abstraction happens. So whether it is imagination, whether it is abstraction, whether it is inference, all this is based on what are the concrete inputs that has already taken place. That is the structure, But when orality comes in, the whole thing changes. Number one, it denies the sensory information. Of course, initially, in the initial stages of our human childhood, at least 3 years, the child will not understand one word. So the initial input is anyway sensory, and then the child will slowly make understanding of what this, what the world and the word means, slowly. But what happens is that because of two reasons: one, teaching, and second, the kind of language that we use. These two layers slowly are denied its existence, and we try to totally depend on the words, I would call it meaningless words, that are put in without the concrete connection. So the child then begins to live in the linguistic realm. So the modern beings are trapped in the linguistic realm and using the mind as the cognitive system completely. In the natural system, the mind's role is secondary to the body. All the initial inputs are to the body only. All the sensory inputs, so the mind and the body works together in the indigenous communities Whereas the moment we shift into literate communities, slowly, the body is denied, the role of senses are denied, and the mind and language together begins to function. So naturally, there are two kinds of languages. We can look at two kinds of languages. One is experiential language, and the other one is actually mental language. Mind, because it's only the mind that understands these words. Interesting examples is that when we say, you eat mango, or you eat jackfruit, or whatever, you eat rice, and not, wheat. When we say these things, immediately we are able to place what you're talking about. That's an experiential language. But the moment I say you eat more carbohydrates, less of protein, more of vitamins, all these words, no connection with the reality. What is happening in the modern context is that almost all conversations are happening at the mind language level. I won't call it conceptual language, because conceptual language is actually a result of, it's actually part of experiential language. Because when I say fruit, for example, that's a concept actually, whereas mango is concrete. But fruit, mango, banana, all these things together is what fruit is. So naturally, fruit is derived from the concrete experiences of having, the respective fruits, mango, banana, this. So basically, that language is very different, because it is holistic language, experience as a basis, abstraction as a way of, creating conceptual language. Whereas the language that modernity uses doesn't go through any of these processes. Here and there, somewhere you can say now this is there for argument's sake, but at a very basic level, that this connection doesn't exist. Because if you look into the whole educational paradigm, the whole schooling is conducted without the body being participating in it. Whatever the teacher is talking about is not there at all in the experiential context of the child. So really what happens in the classroom is that our holistic being, which is the mind and body togetherness, gets fragmented, and the body will function as per its biological rules, and the mind will function in a different way, because the mind can actually now engage with language independent of the body. For example, I remember a child was came and told me that earlier people used to think that the earth was round. Now the earth is flat. This child told me this, because he said this is what the teacher said. So I kept quiet, because what he did was that his experience of the flatness of the world, which is what is evident to him, it converted the teacher's statement to suit his experience, you see. But after 3-4 months I asked him, he told no, it's the other way around. How did he then understand that the earth is round? So most things that are taught are non-experiential, and it is a belief-making system. In that sense, whole modern knowledge system is nothing but another kind of religion in that sense. It's only based on superstitions, and all the teachers are the priests, who are telling you what to believe. You see, and your choice is, and it's exactly like the way a priest functions. If you don't believe, you're out. You're not part of the school. You're excommunicated. You're called illiterates. You're called idiots. And whoever is passing, you will be given degrees. What is that? It's like, more and more, you're creating more and more, high priests. This is what you're doing through education. Because it's nothing but a belief system. And within the belief system, you're creating reasoning. To justify what you believe, you create, reasoning. What are we actually doing with reasoning? Reasoning being used to organize the information that is given to you by somebody. You see, so this is actually, so we have really not critically looked at what is really wrong with education. People have done all kinds of other experiments, but have not really gone deep into the fundamental crisis actually. And the fundamental crisis is this, that every child is biologically equipped to create knowledge of the real world, not the written word. So the problem with alternative education, homeschooling and all that is that two things they are not considering. One, children need to be taught at all. Second, that it is not in language that learning should take place. Actual understanding takes place outside the realm of language, in experience. As you experience, you begin to understand, you make sense. And the language is only for giving names to those things, you know. This is a fundamental problem that has happened, you know. So what happens in the classroom is that your mind learns one thing and your body learns something else. But what does the body learn in the classroom? The body, because it is dictated by biological rules, can only learn what they experience. And what is the experience of the child in the classroom? A teacher teaching, a teacher transferring somebody else's information, a teacher who is not creative, you know, she can be loving or non-loving, it doesn't really matter. But the whole paradigm there is that whatever we are learning about is absent, you know. What is absent we are learning. So the experience, the bodily experience is something very terrible actually. Whereas the mind, because it is not all that critical, it is not disconnected, and because it is afraid, because it believes in the adults, would take in all the things that the teacher says and believe. So the basic fragmentation of our beingness as human fragmentation basically result of these two fundamental things. One, we have made unknown into known. Second, we made learning into teaching. So what modernity has done is that it has subjugated the unknown within the realm of known and learning into the realm of teaching. Because if you look at the modern language, modern, in the pedagogy and all that, they always talk about teaching, learning together. And teaching is always first. You see? So if you actually look at these two things, teaching is a top-down kind of thing. That we have knowledge and we will give it to you. Whereas learning is an inside-out thing. Knowing from inside that you as a being is, engaging with the outer world. So there's a completely different kind of connection that happens.